For more essay content, exclusive videos, and more, be sure to check out Final Girl Digital on Substack. Link below. Hello and welcome back to Final Girl Digital. I am your host, Cricket Guest. This has been a frustrating month for myself and for many women with the release of the Epstein files, or at least some of them. I have spent much of my YouTube and writing career examining what I see as the predatory and pedophilic nature of contemporary culture. The recent release of additional Epstein documents has reignited public discussion about the role of predatory elite networks of men in shaping not only systems of exploitation, but also the commercial and aesthetic industries that structured many of our formative experiences. In response, many women have begun reflecting on the unsettling reality that elements of our self-image were shaped within cultural environments that have been dictated by sexual predators and pedophiles. And I am here to tell you it's more than you think. One Instagram creator said in a reel,
"Right now, millennial women are being forced to reckon with the fact that our experience of girlhood was directly tied to the most powerful sexual predators in modern history. Millennial women grew up in the shadow of Jeffrey Epstein. We didn't know it at the time, but he and his pedophile friends had a finger on all of our decisions, the clothing we wore, the scents we put on our skin, the stores we shopped at, our body image, our insecurities. It's not just that the people we held up as heroes, princes, presidents, Hollywood stars, were in fact villains. It's that the power they wielded over society impacted all of us. The perverted nature of these men infiltrated every aspect of our lives."
And sister, I am going to hold your hand when I say this, but it is not just millennials and it's not just Epstein. Pedophiles have been the dictators of culture for some time now. This is not a millennial experience tied to a specific era or even a specific set of people. Everyone's girlhood is directly tied to sexual predators. The legacy of girlhood as we know it is rooted in pedophilia, which is what I've spent a lot of my time on YouTube talking about. Sexual predators have long shaped the cultural construction of contemporary girlhood. When I have suggested in conversation that contemporary beauty standards are fostered within a culture shaped by these dynamics, I am often met with confusion, hostility, or defensiveness, or dismissiveness, particularly from men. Yet increased attention to Epstein and his network of elite men has prompted wider dialogue. American billionaire Les Wexner of Victoria's Secret was a close associate of Epstein and maintained a long and personal relationship with him. Epstein often utilized his proximity to Wexner in order to lure girls into his vicinity. Multiple fashion industry professionals appear in the documents, including French model scout Jean-Luc Brunel. Donald Trump, another associate of Epstein, owned the Miss Universe organization, which includes Miss Universe, Miss USA, and Miss Teen USA. And he owned these from 1996 to 2015. The Instagram creator continues.
"Mall culture of the early aughts was owned by men associated with Epstein. Bath & Body Works, Limited 2, Abercrombie & Fitch, Victoria's Secret, Pink, stores that sold primarily to young women and children that shaped culture around tween clothing. There were words on the butts of the shorts at Limited 2, shirtless models and dimmed lights at Abercrombie, body sprays with names like Love Spell and Pure Seduction at Victoria's Secret, lingerie marketed to tweens at Pink." L Brands Inc. chairman and CEO Les Wexner wrote in a 2009 letter to shareholders, "Pink, the color that represents tenderness and femininity, the color that evokes childhood, playfulness and purity, the color assigned to girls before they're even born." Epstein was a driving force behind the obsession with prepubescence and the sexualization of young children. Before we knew the term, the male gaze, we knew what it felt like to be viewed through that lens. We also knew that it wasn't about our peers, our classmates. The male gaze was held by adult men who saw us as sexual objects from the moment we exited toddlerhood. Even amid salacious rumors, like the one that circulated middle schools saying Victoria's Secret had cameras in the dressing rooms, and scandals like Abercrombie selling thongs to their tween customers, it was easy to see these stores and their products as just part of the youth-obsessed culture of the 90s and 2000s. We didn't know what we know now. These men had an outsized influence on society's demonization of women's aging, pushing the ideal body type of flat stomachs, perky breasts, smooth skin, hairless bodies, things we didn't realize were shaped by their pedophilic standards. The devastating truth is that they weren't just grooming kids on the island, on the plane, on the ranch. They were grooming all of us.
As I have discussed in several previous videos, the concept of the male gaze is often misunderstood literally as men who look. In practice, it operates less as a series of personal acts, but as the more abstract, subconscious influence of men in positions of power. So this creator is partially right in her assessment when she reflects on her past, that it's not her classmates or her peers that perpetuate the so-called male gaze so much as it is the ways in which industries governed largely by men have shaped the visual and commercial languages through which femininity is constructed and circulated. These elite men on top are pulling the puppet strings of consumer culture, and we, the women and girls, are their dolls. Women have been historically positioned within culture as not the creators of art, nor the target audience, but merely as incidental consumers. Women then come to internalize this representation of the female experience as dictated and represented by a narrow demographic of men. Media has allowed women to consume themselves only as vessels to be consumed, which is something I've talked about quite a bit. Culture through media representations has in this way trained women on how to best present themselves within the context of being consumed, but more specifically on how to be consumed by a very specific target demographic, and the Epstein files has revealed to us who this demographic is, and it's quite scary. When discussing topics such as the male gaze, as it pertains to advertisements and media, it is important to question who art and media are made for. Who is the target demographic? Women may be passive consumers of media, but for much of the history of art and cultural production, we were not the intended audience of the majority of it. The male gaze in reference to art and media, as defined by John Berger, has inherently pedophilic qualities in nature. Feminine performance as shaped by dominant Western culture is deeply intertwined with infantilization, positioning the girl as the ultimate feminine ideal rather than the adult woman. The pressure for women to be youthful, hairless, submissive, and docile reflects this convergence of the male gaze with the infantilizing characteristics inherent to it. Because women are trained from birth to perform in ways meant to be consumed, all women raised within this media environment have inevitably been shaped by this gaze. By extension, this so-called pedophilic fantasy also permeates our subconscious mind. Most women I know shave their legs, their underarms, and genitals, while our male partners' bodies remain largely untouched. Many of my friends, even academic feminists, speak openly about getting Botox and fillers to soften their smile lines and emerging forehead wrinkles. The beauty standard of slimness, in part, is rooted in a legacy shaped by pedophilic beauty standards dictated by elites within the fashion world. This connection is further emphasized by Lex Wexner's association with Epstein. In her memoir, Nobody's Girl, Virginia Roberts writes that Epstein was highly controlling about his own diet and health and projected these standards and expectations onto his victims. She recalls Epstein expressing a preference for very slim bodies and attempting to control what they ate in order to maintain their slender teenage or sometimes prepubescent frames. In his essay, Nymphette Fantasies, Child Beauty Pageants, and the Politics of Innocence, Henry Giro writes, in advertisements for Calvin Klein's Obsession perfume and in his more recent jean ads, innocence becomes a fractured sign and is used unapologetically to present children as the objects of desire and adults as voyeurs. Innocence, in this instance, feeds into enticing images of childlike purity as it simultaneously sexualizes and markets such images. Sexualizing children may be the final frontier in the fashion world, exemplified by the rise of models such as Kate Moss, who represent the ideal woman as a waif, stick-like, expressionless, and blank-eyed. Or it simply makes celebrities out of teenage models such as Ivanka Trump, who in their waning teenage years are left wondering if they are too old to have a career in those culture industries that reduce a woman's talents to elusive, short-lived standards of desire, sexuality, and beauty. What connects the beauty pageants to the world of advertising and fashion modeling is that young girls are being taught to become Little Women, while women are being taught to assume the identities of powerless, childlike waifs. It is admittedly exhausting to try and exist ethically in the world as a woman when so much of the cultural infrastructure defining girlhood and womanhood has been shaped by people who seek to exploit us at best or kill, enslave, and torture us at worst. The fashion and beauty industries are entangled with this exploitation. There is a reason it seems as though every fashion label is owned by a sexual predator. These patterns are not incidental. They reflect the broader reality of consumer capitalism and the way it is designed to reward corrupt behavior. Consumer capitalism functions through extraction of labor, of resources, and of bodies. This extractive nature shapes both environmental destruction and the treatment of women. Extreme concentrations of wealth are enabled by systems that prioritize profit over care, allowing abuses of power to flourish. The billionaire class is sacrificing the planet on a mass scale. This is something we all know. And this is intrinsically tied to systemic abuse of women, aka anyone morally bankrupt enough to be a billionaire is morally bankrupt enough to sacrifice women on a mass scale. It's all interconnected. A culture with a disregard for the land has a disregard for women and vice versa. Many Indigenous scholars, activists, and community members have long drawn on the connections between violence against the land and violence against women, arguing that cultures predicated on values of extraction and domination enact these exact values across every domain. In Violence on the Land, Violence on Our Bodies, Building an Indigenous Response to Environmental Violence, it is written, "The industrial system of resource extraction in Canada is predicated on systems of power and domination. This system is based on the raping and pillaging of Mother Earth as well as violence against women. The two are inextricably linked. With the expansion of extractive industries, not only do we see the desecration of the land, we see an increase in violence against women." In one Instagram I saw, a user stated,
Jeffrey Epstein was the owner of Two Incorporated. Two Incorporated is the Limited Two, Justice Clothing.
That ownership came from Les Wexner, who owns
Everything,
including Victoria's Secret. Les Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein this corporation. But why?
Something that frustrates me is that we let pedophiles own the entire industry of tween and teenage fashion and then committed psychological warfare on adolescent girls for dressing too provocative and tempting to adult men. I can't tell you how many times I was sent home for wearing a top with a strap that was too thin, or because my skirt wasn't to my knees, because it was hard to find clothes that met these requirements. So much of my day was consumed by this stress that I knew I was probably going to get penalized or sent home because what I was wearing was too provocative when it was a hot summer day and sometimes it was the only clothes I had. In the same way that little girls are taught early on to embody characteristics of femininity, such as docility and caregiving, they are also trained, often subconsciously, on how to aesthetically present themselves within the context of being consumed. So this starts off with child clothing brands owned by predators. For instance, when we look at children's clothing, despite the relative lack of sexual dimorphism in prepubescent bodies, clothing designed for girls is often smaller, tighter, and shorter than that designed for boys, restricting their ability to play and move freely in favor of performing the aesthetics of girlishness. Function is forgoed in favor of femininity. And so this is a value that little girls are taught. It is not a coincidence that many of the brands that designed these clothes for girls are owned by predators. Henry Giro continues, What I want to suggest is that the values and dominant motifs that shape beauty pageants gain their meaning and appeal precisely because they find expression in related cultural spheres throughout American society. For instance, by examining advertising campaigns such as those produced by Calvin Klein, or in the increasing use of advertising that depicts the ideal modern American female as young, extremely thin, sexually alluring, and available, it becomes clear that the process at work in the objectification of young children are not altogether different from the relations that take place in other sites. All of these sites use the bodies and the body parts of young girls to market desire and sell goods. What often makes such connections untenable in the public eye is that beauty pageants appropriate innocence as a trope for doing what is best for children, often in the name of dominant family values. And yet it is precisely in the name of innocence that practices that might be seen in other contexts as abusive to children are defined within the dominant culture as simply good, clean family entertainment. In my last video, I discussed how the mediums through which fashion is advertised shifts as the culture does. And the same can be said for modes of child exploitation, from the emergence of child beauty pageants to child stars to child influencers. Culture continuously finds new ways to exploit and parasocially groom little girls. In the 2000s, we saw the emergence of countdown clocks for young celebrities, such as Natalie Portman and the Olsen twins. And today, a similar phenomena appear around child influencers. Figures like Bad Baby and Piper Raquel are now the ones hosting their own countdown clocks in order to launch their OnlyFans. This reflects the extent to which cultural systems have aided in successfully grooming young girls.
Piper was born to her mother, Tiffany Smith, in 2007 in Georgia, and by the time she was 3 years old, she was competing in pageants.
In the same way that we can recognize how vulnerability and environment contribute to exploitation in individual cases, similar structural conditions shape contemporary forms of sexual exploitation of girls. There is frequent discussion about the 1.4 million women on OnlyFans, yet far less attention is given to the hundreds of millions of men who pay for their services. Names like Piper Raquel are public and therefore subject to not only predators, but also to intense online scrutiny for joining such platforms. Meanwhile, the identities of the men eager to subscribe to a freshly 18-year-old are not public. And this is by design. Our culture is structured in a way that places women and girls under public surveillance and moral judgment for participating in a system that they have been conditioned and groomed to find value in, while simultaneously protecting the identities of the men who generate the demand for the very products these women are criticized for supplying. Henry Giro writes, "Any attempt to challenge the sexist practices and abuses at work in children's beauty pageants must begin with the recognition that pageants represent more than trivial entertainment." Educational theorist Valerie Walkerdine argued that forms of popular culture such as the beauty pageant offer a way for working-class girls to escape the limiting discourses and ideologies found in schools and other institutions. Popular culture becomes a realm of fantasy offering the promise of escape, possibility, and personal triumph. Desire, in this instance, gains expression through an endless parade of highly sexualized images and narratives that not only provide the promise of erotic fantasies that quote-unquote belong to them, but also constitute for these young girls an important strategy for survival. According to Walkerdine, popular cultural forms such as child beauty pageants occupy a reputable public space in which pre-adolescent working-class girls are offered forms of identification they can appropriate as survival practices in a society stacked against them. But what Walkerdine ignores is that such fantasies are often founded on forms of identification and hope that offer nothing more than the swindle of fulfillment, providing limited choices and options to young girls. So we can see how the child influencer economy deeply mirrors this, and that in a similar way, child influencers, especially child influencers who grow up within systemic poverty, are given the illusion of an avenue of escape through a mode that both exploits and grooms them.
I'm gonna, retire you.
You're gonna retire
You don't
me.
have to work,
Is this another prank?
It brings me, it pains me to know that you, work all the time and you have, your knees hurt, and it's sad for me to have to watch you work all the time.
If this is a joke, I'm gonna kill you!
It's not a joke, baby.
You're gonna do this for me?
Of course.
Virginia Roberts likewise discusses how girls from impoverished backgrounds were intentionally preyed upon by Epstein and his scouts. I too saw pageantry and modeling as a potential way out of the poverty I grew up in. As I wrote in a previous essay, I became obsessed with beauty very prematurely. In many ways, I saw it as a way out. Perhaps I watched too many fairy tales of the poor young maiden being rescued from unfortunate circumstances by a wealthy prince because she was beautiful. I thought maybe beauty would save me. If I won enough pageants or got signed to a major modeling agency, I too could escape my life of poverty. When Virginia Roberts recalls her experience of being molested by her father and his friend in her childhood and teen years, she details the way in which she found comfort watching Cinderella during these times, finding solace in the story of a girl being mistreated by her family who ultimately escapes her circumstances when she is saved by a wealthy prince. The symbolism becomes especially unsettling later in her account when she describes being woken up by Ghislaine Maxwell in London and told that it was a very special day, and that just like Cinderella, she was going to meet a prince. Though in Virginia's case, the Prince Andrew, would not save her. Instead, he would only add to the sexual abuse she endured. Henry Giro writes, to provide a historical perspective on such pageants, 60 Minutes aired cuts from child beauty pageants that had been seen on the program in 1977 and then presented videotaped shots of John Bonet and other children performing in recent pageants. The contrast was both obscene and informative. The children in the 1977 pageant wore little girl dresses and ribbons in their hair. They embodied a childlike innocence as they displayed their little girl talents. Singing, tap, and baton twirling. Not so with the more recent pageant shots. The contestants did not look like little girls, but rather like coquettish young women whose talents were reduced to an ability to move suggestively across the stage. This quote from Giro highlights the progressive deformation of feminine performance. The line between woman and girl becomes increasingly blurred over time as culture moves further into the simulacrum of feminine performance, which is another concept I've talked about quite a bit on this channel. The feminine spectacle mutates until it exposes the ugly underbelly of the culture that produced it. The young girl has always been a mirror reflecting back the desires of capital. Child pageantry is not an outlier, but a symptom of a culture that emphasizes teaching girls the importance of feminine performance, exemplifying the collapse of distinction between girl and woman within standards of feminine beauty. With toddlers on stage wearing makeup, heels, and corsets, and adult women wearing baby doll dresses, ribbons, and Mary Jane shoes, we inhabit a culture in which girls and women alike are encouraged to embody the same idealized archetype, a mutated, artificially constructed feminine figure defined by ambiguous youth paired with sexual viability. In Visual Pleasures, Laura Mulvey writes, in a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between active male and passive female. The determining male gaze projects its fantasy onto the female figure, which is styled accordingly. The industries of child pageantry, child stardom, and now child influencing groom girls within this framework. The young girl is molded with the awareness and expectation that she will be looked at and is taught how to perform correctly under such voyeurism that is inherent to her existence as a girl. Whether it be to attract this gaze or deter it, Little girls are raised with an increased self-awareness of their bodies and the attention they attract simply due to being born a girl. The obsession with youth haunts women due to the social conditioning that a woman's value is intrinsically tied to youth, which is perpetuated by the fucking predators that we're talking about today. Susan Sontag writes in The Double Standard of Aging, which is something I quote a lot here. Forgive me, you've probably heard this quote a million times. For women, only one standard of female beauty is sanctioned: the girl. The great advantage men have is that our culture allows two standards of male beauty: the boy and the man. The beauty of a boy resembles the beauty of a girl. In both sexes, it is a fragile kind of beauty and flourishes naturally only in the early part of the life cycle. Happily, men are able to accept themselves under another standard of good looks: heavier, rougher, more thickly built. A man does not grieve when he loses the smooth, unlined, hairless skin of a boy. There is no equivalent of this standard for women. The single standard of beauty for women dictates that they must go on having clear skin. Every wrinkle, every line, every gray hair is a defeat. No wonder that no boy minds becoming a man, while even the passage from girlhood to early womanhood is experienced by many women as their downfall. For all women are trained to continue to wanting to look like girls. Due to the singular standard of feminine beauty that Sontag identifies, the blurred boundary between the aesthetics of girl and the woman produces an effect of infantilization in women, while simultaneously fostering a culture that grooms girls to perform femininity later in life. As noted earlier in reference to John Berger's theory, the influence of the gaze conditions women and girls through their consumption of media to understand themselves primarily as objects to be viewed as vessels for consumption. I am not shocked by the billionaire class and their associates that have been unveiled to be deeply predatory men, engaging in sick and twisted acts from sex trafficking children to potentially fucking eating babies. What surprises me most is that people are shocked by these revelations. There is widespread disbelief that powerful men could engage in exploitation and abuse. Billionaires are quite literally parasitic entities. You can only be a billionaire at the expense of human welfare. We all know this. History repeatedly shows us that unchecked power leads to moral corruption. We've all learned about the Stanford prison experiment, right? We saw demonstrated how quickly ordinary individuals internalized roles of authority and that manifested in violence. We saw that men simply cosplaying as cops made them more violent and twisted towards the inmates that they knew were pretending to be prisoners, not even actual prisoners. Now take that study and amplify it by 1,000,000. You don't have the power of a cop, you have the power of a king. If relatively small amounts of situational power can produce those effects, it is worth asking what happens when the authority is magnified to the level of immense wealth and global influence that we see from men like Epstein or Bill Gates or Trump. And we've all heard of how porn corrupts men's brains, right? We all know how access to porn makes men wanting to engage in increasingly taboo and violent sexual acts. Okay, now imagine you combine these things. You are one of the most powerful men in the world, and not only do you have access to porn, but worse, you have access to any amount of sex workers you could want in order to play out your sadistic fantasies. At some point, it's not enough, though. You don't want a sex worker who is pretending to be a sex slave. You want an actual sex slave. You don't want a sex worker who is pretending to be underage. You want an actual minor. And when you continuously engage in this behavior, it's like a drug. You become desensitized and you keep wanting more and more. When people have the means to gratify every desire without constraint or accountability, the boundary between entitlement and exploitation erodes. Over time, this can produce a pattern of escalation in which empathy is dulled and other people are treated less as individuals and more as instruments for personal satisfaction. The issue then is not simply individual morality, but a broader cultural system that allows power, wealth, and anonymity to operate without meaningful limits. And I want everyone to cut this Satanist bullshit out. These are Christian men. These are Jewish men. These are Muslim men. These are Hindu men. These are men. Many are quick to declare that they are Satanists, that they are worshiping the devil, and I am so sorry to have to tell you, but this is not the work of the devil or a monster under the bed. It's men. This is what men corrupted by greed do. This is the good old patriarchal Christian values that America was built upon. Cannibalism, sex trafficking, and sexual slavery. Indigenous and Black communities will be the first to tell you, and have been telling you, that this is the legacy of America. Change starts with holding our own communities accountable, and that means admitting to yourself that men, regardless of faith, have the capacity to be evil. What we are seeing in the Epstein files is not a one-off mistake. These men are only unique in their wealth, not their corruption and their impulse to control and take advantage of little girls. Men like what you see in the Epstein files exist in your neighborhood, on your street, in your school, in your family, and sometimes in your homes. This was kind of a heavier one, guys. I have been so inundated with so much information about the files, as I'm sure many people, especially women, have been over the past month. And it's very frustrating and devastating. And I just feel really sad and mad and hopeless sometimes, especially about this topic. It's a topic I've been writing about and talking about for a long time, and I know a lot of you have also been listening for a long time and researching about this yourselves for a long time, or experiencing the violence as a result of existing in a culture like this. And I just want better. I want better for us as women, as people. That's all from me. That's all from me today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. I recently saw a film that I am certain will be one of my favorite films of the year, titled The Sound of Falling. The Sound of Falling is a movie release following 4 adolescent girls who each spend their youth in the same farmhouse over the last century. This film is a beautiful, poetic musing on the intergenerational trauma intrinsic to being a woman, and it's a film that I know many of my viewers will love as much as I did. The Sound of Falling is available in select theaters, and if you have the chance to see this movie on the big screen, I highly recommend it. Additionally, Die My Love, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Robert Pattinson, is now available to stream on Mubi, which has been another standout film for me and a must-watch. Die My Love follows a young mother who is slowly slipping into madness. Locked away in an old house in Montana, her increasingly agitated and erratic behavior leaves her companion Jackson worried and helpless. And lucky for you, you can head to Mubi.com/finalgirldigital, where Mubi is offering 30 days of cinema for free. I am so grateful to partner with Mubi, as always, as Mubi is a service I have genuinely used and loved for years that has allowed me to easily access and discover films that have since become my favorites. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to follow Final Girl Digital on Substack, where I post weekly essays, personal musings, and have recently started a monthly intelligence maxing series where I recommend 5 to 10 things you should read or watch this month, including essays, books, and lectures. See you there!